The morning sun had barely climbed above the Arizona desert when two grieving Apache widows found themselves standing at the edge of everything they had ever known. Behind them, their tribe turned away without a single backward glance. Ahead of them stretched only endless dust, towering red cliffs, and a future filled with hunger, fear, and loneliness. They had lost their husbands to violence, but that was not the end of their suffering. Tradition and fear had made them outcasts, blamed for bringing misfortune upon their people. Every familiar face disappeared into the distance while the hot wind carried away the last traces of the lives they once cherished. It looked as though the desert itself had decided they would vanish without anyone remembering their names. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who loves powerful Wild West stories, and subscribe to Stories of Wild West if you believe that even in the harshest days of the 1800s, everyone deserved a second chance. Now settle in for a story that proves kindness can change history in ways no one ever expects. The two widows were named Nayeli and Tahoma. Though both had known hardship long before that terrible morning, nothing compared to the silence that followed their banishment. They carried only a few worn blankets, a small bundle of dried food, and memories too painful to speak aloud. Every step through the rocky desert reminded them that survival was no longer guaranteed. The scorching daytime heat burned their skin while sharp stones tore apart the worn sandals beneath their feet. Buzzards circled high overhead, as though waiting for another forgotten tragedy to unfold beneath the endless blue sky. For 3 days they wandered without finding a safe place to rest. The little food they possessed disappeared quickly, and thirst became their greatest enemy. They avoided settlements, knowing prejudice often waited there as fiercely as hunger. Stories had traveled across the frontier about Apache warriors, and few settlers cared to separate innocent women from frightening legends. Every distant rider became another reason to hide behind rocks or thick patches of cactus until the danger passed. Miles away, another life was unfolding beneath that same brilliant sun. A cowboy named Silas Boone spent his days alone on a modest cattle ranch inherited from his aging father. Unlike many ranchers chasing fortune across the territory, Silas cared more about honest work than growing wealthy. Years earlier, disease had taken his wife and young daughter within the same winter. Their graves rested beneath 2 cottonwood trees overlooking a quiet creek, and every sunrise reminded him of both unbearable loss and the fragile value of compassion. Since then, silence had become his closest companion. One blazing afternoon, while searching for 2 missing calves near a narrow canyon, Silas noticed movement among scattered boulders. At first he assumed it was a wounded animal, but as he approached cautiously, he discovered 2 exhausted women barely able to stand. Their faces revealed days without proper food or water, and fear filled their tired eyes. They expected another man carrying suspicion instead of mercy. Yet Silas lowered his rifle, removed his hat as a sign of peace, and offered his canteen without asking a single question. That small act of kindness broke something inside both women. They had prepared themselves for rejection once again, but instead found simple humanity. Silas shared dried beef, fresh bread, and cool water beneath the shade of a mesquite tree. Although language separated them, gratitude required no translation. He understood enough gestures to realize they had nowhere left to go. Looking toward the lonely road leading back to his ranch, he faced a choice that could change every remaining year of his life. The frontier rarely rewarded compassion. Neighbors often warned one another against helping strangers, especially anyone connected to tribes they feared. Yet Silas remembered standing beside 2 small graves with no one willing to ease his own suffering. He could not ignore people facing the same emptiness he once carried. Before the afternoon ended, he motioned for the women to follow him home. The ranch was humble but welcoming. A weathered cabin stood beside a red barn surrounded by grazing cattle and a vegetable garden that struggled against the dry climate. Chickens wandered freely across the yard while an old shepherd dog named Copper greeted every visitor with cautious curiosity. For the first time since their banishment, Nayeli and Tahoma slept beneath a roof without fearing the coming sunrise. Recovery came slowly. Weeks of exhaustion had weakened both women, yet they refused to remain idle. Every morning they helped gather eggs, repaired torn clothing, carried water from the creek, and learned the routines of ranch life. Their knowledge of medicinal plants amazed Silas when they treated an injured horse using herbs collected from nearby hills. The horse recovered far quicker than expected, earning the admiration of neighboring ranch hands who quietly admitted they had never witnessed such skill before. Despite their hard work, whispers spread across nearby settlements. Travelers claimed the cowboy had invited danger onto his land. Some predicted raids, while others insisted misfortune would surely follow. Old prejudices proved stubborn companions across the Wild West. Customers avoided buying cattle from Silas. Friends stopped visiting. Even merchants became hesitant to extend credit at the trading post. Compassion slowly transformed into financial hardship. Silas never complained. Instead, he worked longer hours, repairing fences, branding calves, and harvesting crops while Nayeli and Tahoma stood beside him from sunrise until evening. Together they formed something stronger than friendship. They became a family created not by blood, but by shared pain and unwavering loyalty. As summer deepened, the region suffered its worst drought in years. Creeks dried into cracked earth, wells failed, and cattle collapsed beneath relentless heat. Ranches throughout the valley faced ruin. Farmers watched entire fields wither beneath the burning daytime sun. Fear spread faster than wildfire because no one knew where fresh water remained. Nayeli remembered stories told by her grandfather about hidden springs concealed within ancient rock formations. Guided by those memories, she spent several days exploring distant canyons alongside Tahoma. Late one afternoon, they discovered a narrow passage covered by thick brush where cool water still flowed beneath stone ledges protected from evaporation. It was enough to save not only one ranch, but many. Silas immediately shared the discovery with neighboring families instead of keeping the precious spring for himself. At first, few believed him, but desperation overcame suspicion. Wagon after wagon followed the narrow trail into the canyon, returning with barrels filled with crystal-clear water. Livestock survived, crops recovered. Families who had once ignored Silas now realized their lives had been preserved because two women they had rejected possessed knowledge unavailable anywhere else. Respect replaced fear little by little. Children became the first to approach Nayeli and Tahoma without prejudice. They listened eagerly to stories about wildlife, stars, healing plants, and the traditions carried across generations. Mothers sought herbal remedies for sick infants. Ranchers asked advice about surviving harsh seasons. The women who had once been abandoned slowly became trusted members of the community. Yet the greatest challenge still waited beyond the horizon. One bright autumn afternoon, smoke rose from the western hills. A fast-moving wildfire driven by fierce winds raced toward the valley. Dry grass exploded into towering walls of flame. Panic swept across every ranch as families rushed to save children, livestock, and whatever possessions they could carry. The fire moved too quickly for ordinary escape. Tahoma recognized the changing winds and remembered natural fire breaks hidden among rocky ridges. Working beside Silas, she directed dozens of frightened settlers toward safer ground while Nayeli organized water lines using barrels hauled from the hidden spring. Cowboys, farmers, Apache women, and frightened children worked side by side without caring about old divisions. Hour after exhausting hour, they fought the advancing flames until sunset finally brought calmer winds. When dawn arrived, much of the valley still stood. Because of their courage, the newspapers that occasionally reached frontier towns rarely celebrated quiet acts of mercy, but stories travel farther than ink. Travelers carried tales of the cowboy who sheltered two abandoned widows, and of the women who later saved an entire valley from drought and disaster. Visitors came not to witness conflict but to see a rare community where compassion had overcome generations of fear. Months passed, and the lonely ranch transformed into something unexpected. Families gathered there for harvest celebrations. Children learned horseback riding beside lessons about respecting different cultures. Seeds, tools, and knowledge were shared freely. Silas no longer measured success by the number of cattle grazing his fields. Instead, he found purpose watching people who once distrusted one another now working together beneath the same wide sky. Even the Apache elders eventually heard what had happened. Age had softened many hearts, and regret weighed heavily upon those who realized fear had driven them to abandon innocent women. One clear afternoon, Several respected elders arrived peacefully at the ranch. They found Nayeli and Tahoma surrounded not by enemies but by neighbors who genuinely loved them. No anger remained inside the two widows. Time and kindness had healed wounds revenge never could. Though they accepted sincere apologies, they chose not to return. Their home was no longer defined by the place that had cast them out. Home had become wherever compassion lived, and that place was beside the people who had stood with them when they possessed nothing. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness still changes lives, subscribe to Stories of Wild West, and let us know in the comments what part of this journey moved you the most. Special comment request. Comment, kindness always finds a way, if you believe one act of compassion can change generations. As another peaceful daytime sunrise spread golden light across the valley, Silas stood watching children laugh where fear had once ruled. Nearby, Nayeli gathered fresh herbs, while Tahoma helped young riders learn to care for their horses with patience instead of force. The desert had not changed. The cliffs remained rugged, the sun still blazed, and life on the frontier continued to demand courage every single day. But one decision made by a lonely cowboy had transformed despair into hope, strangers into family, and forgotten widows into the very heart of a thriving community. Long after every witness was gone, people continued telling the story of the two Apache widows who were cast out by their own tribe and the cowboy who refused to let their story end in the desert. They remembered that bravery is not always found in gunfights or battles. Sometimes the greatest courage is simply opening a door when the rest of the world turns someone away. And because one man chose compassion over fear beneath the bright western sun, countless lives were forever changed, proving that the strongest legacy any person can leave behind is not wealth or power, but the kindness they show when no one else is willing.